I brought her in this hospital able to walk, and I'm lifting her to the bathroom because there's not even a wheelchair. And she was 9. But I remember her saying, "Mommy, heaven would be better than this.
Yeah.
If I just went to Jesus and I was in heaven, I wouldn't be in pain anymore, Mommy, and it'd be all better. I could walk again." And she would just say, "I think it would be better if I just die, Mommy." At that point, Sarah realized they thought there was something wrong in her head. And she'd say, "Why won't they believe me, Mommy? I'm dying." That Jesus was actually forsaken by God the Father.
Yeah.
So that when I felt forsaken, that he knew what I was going through.
The Faith on Fire podcast. Faith in Jesus like you've never heard before. And here's your host, Oriel O'Gorman.
Welcome to the show today. Well, I'm here with my lovely wife, Heather.
Hello.
On the show today. Thank you for joining us, Heather.
I'm glad to be here and glad to share this story.
And the story we have for you today is really, it is a powerful one. It is an emotional one. It's a personal one for Heather and I. And really, we're going to talk a little bit about our daughter, Sarah. And back in 2019, she became very ill with Lyme disease. And it's been an ongoing thing in our lives, as you'll hear. But I really wanted to get Heather's perspective on it as a mother. Of course, we both went through it together. But Heather was with Sarah in some of those awful moments when she was really sick, and really remembers a lot of those challenging moments. And so we want to talk about that today. Okay.
That's great.
Well, first of all, I wanted to ask, Heather, when did you start to think something was wrong with Sarah back in 2019?
Well, we have 5 children, and so we are very used to lots of flus and viruses, and have been in and out of the hospital with broken arms and a concussion and those things. So when the kids aren't unwell, when they are unwell, we don't really think much of it, and you just expect it to be another childhood normal illness. And so Sarah had a slight fever. She had a bit of a rash, which I explained away as sensitive skin. And she just wasn't well. She wasn't kind of free in her movement, and she was not tired fatigued, but in a weak way fatigued. Like she just wasn't keeping up with normal life. And so after a few days, Oriel took her to the doctor, and the doctor was concerned that it hadn't shifted and that the rash and the fever combined and all. She just thought it would be better to send her on to hospital to get assessed properly. And so we were in and out of the hospital quite quickly. And then she came home, and again, we're just expecting it to be quite normal. But she just kept, it was slow in some ways, but she just kept declining and never bounced back. And it was not like a normal flu. The illness began to be kind of more about weakness in her limbs and pain than actual illness. And so it kind of was starting to concern us. And I just remember at one point then saying, she's getting too weak to walk up the stairs. Yeah. And I remember taking her back in the hospital.
Do you think that was a point where it was like, something is seriously wrong here, when you realized she couldn't walk upstairs?
Yes. And I just remember taking her, it was the 2nd or 3rd time into the A&E, and she just was so incredibly weak for a very normal, healthy, vibrant child. Yeah. And it just was a very, very strange feeling to not know what was wrong. Yeah. And hit that point.
I think it seems like you recognized that there was something seriously wrong before I did. And obviously I'm with the kids, not as much as you are, but I am with the kids a good deal, but I just remember you beginning to see that you felt really uneasy that she was sick. I remember particularly when her teacher in primary school said, Sarah can't get through the day. She's so exhausted for the last hour or two of school that I've got to get her just to put her head down on the desk because she was so tired. And I remember, I think for both, it was like, that's very strange. Because Sarah's not that kind of kid. No. Like she's full of beans, Yeah. So
And I think then starting to be in the hospital and just having all these little things, like there was one little thing wrong with her blood, but then the next time it would be fine, with her blood work. And then the next time the doctor thought they heard something up with her heart. And then everyone after that thought it was fine until the second hospital, nearly 2.5 months later. So there were only these little hints of something wrong, but the rest was just weakness and pain in her limbs.
Yeah.
And so that left us very uneasy and very unsure of what was going on for a long time.
You were telling me earlier that it really impressed you how helpless you felt. I think we both, particularly when we started going to hospital, I think I was as aware as you were that something seriously wrong with our daughter. And when all those blood tests were coming back, I remember looking at her phlebotomy sheet from the first hospital, and it went to pages of tests that they had done to try to figure out, why does this child have pain in her joints? Why is she so fatigued? Why is she literally
not
losing?
Getting better.
Yeah, she's losing movement in her limbs like all the time. But how did that make you feel? And as a person of faith, how did that make you feel at that time?
Well, I think once we had gotten past the first hospital stay, so we were in there several days, and then they sent us home. And it was just, they thought maybe she just had some kind of maybe chronic fatigue or a post-viral something, and they couldn't figure it out. And Sarah was hit hard emotionally because she couldn't get better.
Yeah.
She was feeling much worse, but they were saying, oh, you're getting better, you're fine. And she was getting to the point where she was struggling to walk across the room, just to go to the bathroom or something. And so that was getting very, very concerning. And I remember the helplessness in her, and I couldn't fix her. And that broke my heart, because when she would ask me questions or why am I not getting better, I didn't really have a good answer. And she wasn't really asking a lot of questions about faith at that point, just why am I not getting better? And so I remember one day just encouraging her to write down her thoughts to God, like in a letter, and just talk to God about it and tell God what she felt like. And I remember she sat there for a good long while, and she wrote up a big page. And then, of course, in Sarah's little artsy way, she loves art. And so it wasn't just a letter. She had it all folded up carefully with a little ribbon around it. Yeah. And she felt so much better. And I think at that point, I realized the beauty of Isaiah 40, verse 11. And it just talks about how God will lead his flock like a shepherd. So God is our shepherd, and how he holds the lambs in his arms close to his heart. And that then it does talk, which is nice for me as a mother, how he gently leads those that are with young, the mothers. And so that's been a precious verse to me. But at that moment, when she wrote the letter to God and had that interaction with God, I knew that God was helping her, and that this was her journey. This wasn't, I would be walking alongside her, but this was her journey with God. This was something between her and God that was quite separate than me. And just having to realize that God loved her more than me, even though I'm her mother, that God cared about her in every detail of her emotions and her body and her health, and, even her faith, and that he would hold her, and he would walk that journey with her. Yeah.
I remember this was earlier. It was probably in February. She was still at home. You're talking to when she was in the hospital, the first hospital. But I remember her being home, and again, she's very weak, and she kept getting more ill. And I remember watching her reading her Bible there in the cabin where we were living.
And journaling.
Yeah. She's writing things that were speaking to her from the Bible. And I said to her, Sarah, maybe this is why you've been sick. And at that point, you're thinking it's just a flu. She'll be back in a week. She'll be back in school next week and bouncing off the walls as per usual, But I thought, I said, Sarah, maybe God wanted to speak to you, and that's why you're not well, because you got to spend some extra time with him and talking to him. And it's amazing to me that, you know, far from children not being able to have a relationship with God, sometimes their relationship with God is even more real than adults' relationship with God. And it's very simple for them. He's real. It's very simple to grasp that.
And God loves me, and they have no reason to doubt that, you know.
Yeah. It is amazing. Well, time then went on, and, you know, I'll just tell a little bit of the story. She was in hospital for almost 2 weeks in the first hospital, and then she was home for about a week. And I remember a real turning point was when we were watching her shuffling across the floor to the bathroom.
And you remember that was actually before the first so she was in the hospital for 4 days.
Yeah.
And when she was shuffling to the bathroom and her legs went purple, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
That was before the 2 week stay.
Right.
And
okay.
And that was so scary.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
It was just something is wrong.
And we knew
here.
there's something dreadfully wrong.
You know, and we're, you know, the doctors are saying chronic fatigue syndrome, post-viral fatigue syndrome, and we're just saying, and I believe even at that point the doctors have suggested, and again they were trying to figure out what was wrong, but perhaps it's a psychiatric cause. You know, there's some sort of depression or trauma, and it's brought on these physical symptoms, which of course is possible. Yeah. But I remember when I saw her shuffling across the floor and her legs were just purple. It looked so weird.
And blotchy. It was very strange,
And just thinking, no, there's something wrong here, you know. Well, talk a little bit about what it was like when she went back to hospital then for those 2 weeks in the first hospital. What do you remember from that, and what were the lessons that God taught you in that time?
I think in the first hospital, there was a lot more trauma for Sarah, emotionally and physically. She went in able to walk as the first week of that nearly 2 weeks went on. It got harder and harder to walk, and that was very scary for her. And the doctors were trying, because there's nothing showing up in her blood work. Yeah. So they had no reason to think that there was anything more seriously wrong with her. So they would come in trying to be very encouraging and would smile and, oh, you're looking so much better today, to try to do that kind of reverse psychology, you know, like if you think you're better, you'll be better. And which I know they were trying their best. But that was very hard for Sarah because she knew day by day how much worse she was feeling. Yeah. And then she was dealing with physiotherapy, which in so many illnesses and even post-surgery and everything, it's very positive. Like normally physiotherapy would be excellent, but for someone with Sarah's condition, it actually makes them worse. So I remember going down to the hospital physiotherapy gym, and the physiotherapists were so fantastic and so caring, and they tried to be so happy and positive. And Sarah would try to cooperate, but she was in such pain. And I remember particularly the last time she walked ever in those months that she was so unwell. Her legs were so weak that she held onto the bars in the physiotherapy room, the parallel bars, and just her arms just shook because she's literally holding all her weight with her arms. Yes. And she would shuffle forward. And it took nearly 45 minutes, nearly the whole session, to go from one end to the other and partway back. And it was so heartbreaking. And I had to stand behind her because I just would stream tears because I wanted to help. And I wanted to intervene and do something. But I thought that even that this was good, that this was trying to keep her moving. Yeah. So, and then after that, she could never walk again. Yeah. And then a few days later, then they were trying to help. And again, it was not out of meanness. They just thought she was giving up. So they were really trying to push her. And she, after that particular session, it wasn't just that she couldn't walk it wore her out so much. And again, every step down was permanent in that phase of her illness, until many months later. So that afternoon she came back to her bed and she started holding her head over to the side, and I was like, no, honey, lift your head up. And she couldn't lift her head up anymore.
Yeah. The neck muscles had gotten so weak.
They just had gone. And so she couldn't even hold up her head at that point. And so then the next time the physiotherapist came, they were trying to get her to just sit up in the chair. And so they would hold her arms back to try to help her sit up. But she literally had nothing left in her neck muscles. And her head would just flop and flop. And even her core muscles were giving out at that point. So then she just, I can't do it with the mics here, but she was, bent forward just with her neck, no self-protection.
Yeah.
She didn't have any ability to self-protect, which you normally would airways and, with your head, even involuntarily, but she couldn't. Yeah. And her head just bounced off the chair that they'd put in front of her. And other parents in the ward literally left crying because it was so distressing. Yeah. Not just for me as a mother, but for other parents in the room. Yeah. And so all of that was so distressing for Sarah. And all I could really do in those moments was just hold her and cry with her and think that she would probably be better. It would turn around and she would start to feel stronger and she would feel better. And I remember God sending us some really precious people to come visit us in the hospital pre-COVID days. Which was so nice. And, they would just show up and pray with us or just look in Sarah's eyes and tell her how much God loved her. Yeah. And those things were such an encouragement to our hearts because anyone that has stayed in the hospital knows it's very, very, very busy. Yeah. And you don't have time to sit and have times to contemplate, And so those moments became like a lifeline to remind us of God's ways and God's goodness and that he loved us. And remember it encouraging Sarah as well. Yeah.
And I remember you were with Sarah more than me in the hospital, and particularly in that stay in the first hospital. And some of these things I didn't realize till afterwards, because if you told me about them, you just told me very briefly because we were in crisis, And
we were just passing each other. Yeah, we ever got to talk.
I was trying to, of course, we have four other kids, soon to be 6 kids, of course. But I was trying to take care of the other kids and make sure they were okay, get them to school. We were doing all of that. But I remember when Sarah got better and you told me about all, I just was so sad. I just was appalled. I was angry. And that how could they do that to Sarah? And like you've said, it wasn't like they were intentionally trying to hurt her. The doctor had said, this is, as best we can tell, this is chronic fatigue syndrome. And he was doing what you do for chronic fatigue. Exactly. The only thing was that wasn't what was wrong. But how did that make you feel? Particularly, go back to that moment where you're in the hospital, the physios are trying to get Sarah out of the bed. They don't seem to realize she literally does not have the physical strength to hold up her head, let alone stand up. Her head is banging repeatedly off the chair. What's going through your heart and mind as a mother?
I just felt so hopeless and not heard. Because I was telling them, I remember after the first week that we were in that hospital, the doctor said, well, everything is great. You're going to get better. And I want you in school on Monday. And Sarah just had these big eyes. And she didn't even speak back to him. She just stared in honestly disbelief. She just couldn't believe he was saying this. And I tried to stutter out, I brought her in this hospital able to walk. And I'm lifting her to the bathroom because there's not even a wheelchair. She was 9. I said, I'm lifting her to the to the bathroom. And he said, well, she needs to do that herself. And I said, it takes her 45 minutes to get to the end of the bed, Yes. but he wanted her in school. And it's like, because some, the blood tests and so many tests that would normally show up what was wrong, nothing was showing anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just to say she's weaker is so nondescript.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like if she had this strong diagnosis, it would have been easier, like it would be legitimate, but then it's when they said it was probably psychological or psychiatric, then it became all about jollying her along. And so then I just felt so helpless. I couldn't, it was like I normally could speak for my child and speak up for them. But what I said, it wasn't taken into account. And, all that is just very unsettling as a mother. And then they started a little bit questioning our family life. And that would be very sad because, you're trying to raise your children with love and, positivity and support and then to think that everyone in this situation thinks there's something dreadfully wrong in your family. Yeah. That's, all those things were very unsettling. I think more as a mother than anything else, even, mentally or spiritually or anything. It just was very unsettling as a mother to be so helpless, not just helpless to fix her, but helpless to even speak up for her or advocate for her.
So let's fast forward to April. Of course, Sarah had been in one hospital. They had not been able to figure out what was wrong with her. And so we actually brought her to a different hospital, which was a bit of a cheeky move, but we were very desperate. Describe when we were in that second hospital, how was Sarah doing? What can you remember about that time?
At that point, I'm actually very thankful for this, but Sarah had a lot of brain fog. She was so incredibly unwell at that point that, she talked to us like normal and everything, but she was not reasonable at all and very panicky because she couldn't, by the time we were in the second hospital, she couldn't move her arms. She couldn't move a finger. Yeah. She couldn't move her head from side to side, let alone support it.
Yeah. Couldn't chew her food. I remember
we got to that point, in the second hospital. Yeah. And she was so unwell that she actually doesn't remember a lot of that. Yeah. So I'm really thankful for that.
I remember.
But as a parent.
Yeah. I remember being with her in the room one night and you were trying to get home and be with the kids and get some rest. And she wanted the TV on. And then she wanted the channel changed. And then she wanted the TV off. And it was just like her mind was totally scrambled. She couldn't think straight. And she was really sad and crying and moaning, And
she was in so much pain.
And it's not her,
No, it wasn't her.
Sarah's a pretty cheerful kid, But it was very hard to watch when what you're talking about, the brain fog,
They did so many tests there in that hospital stay. So pretty much there was no treatment at that point because they were so desperately trying to help. And I remember when the doctor took over Sarah's case, she looked at me with real concern and she said, "We are going to get to the bottom of this." Yeah. But then when they saw all the tests that had already been done, and they did a slew more tests, some that were very painful for Sarah, some that weren't even going to work properly because she couldn't actually move her muscles anymore. It became more and more suspicious. Like they really genuinely thought that it was psychological or psychiatric. And it was really, really tough because Sarah knew that she was sick, and all the time after the doctors would leave, she would say, "Why won't they believe me?" And she had enough understanding to know they thought it was in her head. And she said, "It's not in my head, Mommy." And I remember they sent, because she had lost the ability to vocalize very loud at all, even if someone was hurting her, in moving her on the bed or something, or you'd pull her hair on accident or something, she couldn't even cry out anymore, which really would break my heart. So, but because she wasn't vocalizing very well at all, and then she wouldn't move her head to look at the doctors,
Yeah.
they sent in a speech specialist. And I'm not sure that the speech specialist actually understood. She's the sweetest, most lovely lady, gentle heart, you know. But she was going through flashcards with Sarah to see if Sarah understood language. And that devastated Sarah. Sarah
Yeah.
speaks 2 languages. You know, she speaks Irish and English. And yeah, she's in a Gael school, so she's bilingual.
She has to.
She has to be. And at that point, Sarah realized they thought there was something wrong in her head. And she'd say, "Why won't they believe me, Mommy? I'm dying."
Yeah.
And I just remember her being so desperate, and just her little eyes would be so full of tears. And I remember her eyes looking so big because it's kind of all that moved in her body anymore.
Yeah.
And the only way she could express, and just being, she's saying, "Why won't they believe me, Mommy? I'm so sick. I'm so sick."
I remember bringing Sean, all the kids, in to see her, and Sean said the same thing. He said it was so strange. The only part of Sarah that moved was her eyes.
Yeah.
She didn't move her hands. She didn't move her head. And that he was brokenhearted. He was so sad that she was that sick.
It was very hard for the other kids to see as well.
In quiet moments, she started to talk about the possibility of dying, didn't she?
She did. And that is probably one of the hardest conversations a parent could have.
Yeah.
But I remember her saying, "Mommy, heaven would be better than this.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I just went to Jesus and I was in heaven, I wouldn't be in pain anymore, Mommy, and it'd be all better. I could walk again." And she would just say, "I think it would be better if I just die, Mommy." And I didn't want her to talk about that, but I let her talk it out, you know. And I just remember at the same time as it was so emotional and so incredibly heartbreaking, and I would try so hard to keep my own tears back and my own fears out of my face. Just being so comforted at the same time that Sarah had that hope. Even when I was a child, I had, people say had strong faith. I don't know if it's strong faith as much as I came to understand what Jesus had done for me on the cross, and that how his death on the cross, at that moment he died, it was like he was carrying my sin, all my failures and the guilt that I felt, even as a young person, on his body, as if like a backpack. And then he took punishment, like all kids, they get a punishment in school or a punishment at home, whatever. And I just remember the moment that I realized that Jesus took the punishment for me. So I would never have to stand before God and take my own punishment. But that Jesus had done all that for me. And I would actually, when I asked God to forgive all my sins and I believed in him and asked him to give me eternal life and come into my life, thinking I stand before him not to to deal with my own sin and take the punishment that I deserved, but actually to stand there as his child in love. And I had that assurance as a child, and I looked forward to heaven as a child, and I wasn't afraid. And so then to see my own child be so at peace with her relationship with God, and I knew that she had come to that point herself, and she had talked to God about her problems, her sins, and I know they're on the child level, it's not that she's done anything terribly wrong, but I remember as a child feeling deep guilt over the things that I had done, and that God took away all of that and forgave, not because I was a special, or good, particularly good person or anything, just because Jesus had taken my place. And Sarah had come to that point and had that interaction with God where she asked Jesus into her life, and she had believed on Jesus and asked God to forgive all her sins because of Jesus' death on the cross. And so she knew heaven was there for her, and there was no fear. And even though it was so incredibly emotional, and I hope I hope I never have to have a conversation like that with any of my children again. But the peace that came at that moment to know she's not afraid. Yeah. She has, just like at the beginning of sharing the story that, she'd written that letter to God and she was on her own journey with God.
Yeah.
That was the case even then at the very, very worst moment for her, that God was there for her and she knew that if the worst happened, it was actually something good and that she wouldn't be in pain and she would be with Jesus and that would be actually wonderful.
And that's a powerful hope that anybody can have. Yeah. That is why Jesus came, and we talk about the gospel and sometimes we're not quite sure what that means. Yeah. Gospel just means good news. Yeah. And the gospel is the good news about Jesus, that he came to die for our sins, like you've shared so powerfully there, and anybody can have that assurance if we're simply willing to believe on Jesus, to ask him to save us, to forgive us. And of course, we've tried to share that here on the podcast in various ways. Now, in that whole time, I remember people began to contact us, people in Ireland, people from America, and they began to say, could it be a thing called Lyme disease? Now, I don't think I definitely didn't know anything about Lyme disease at that point. But I remember, first of all, my sister is married to an American and his sister had gotten a tick bite
as a young person,
as a child, and had been sick, had become sicker and sicker over, I think it was 7 or 8 years, till finally she was so sick she was having seizures. She couldn't walk at times. She had intense pain in her joints. And it turned out she had Lyme disease, that she'd gotten a tick bite. It had gone unnoticed. And that Lyme bacteria had gotten into her body and it had gotten worse and worse over time. And I remember, I think it was Chris said to me, could she have Lyme disease? In fact, I remember my mom said to me, she had seen this girl when she was at her worst. And she said, Sarah is starting to look like Chris's sister, Yeah. And it was just heartbreaking, You had a similar experience. Your cousin
contacted us. Yeah. And was saying her son had been bitten by a tick and then he wasn't well. And so they tested and tested and tested. And I can't remember off the top of my head how many times, but I was kind of shocked how many times they tested for the same disease. Yeah. And then it was positive and he was given the antibiotics and the treatment and he recovered. But he was on that same very quick slope that Sarah had already been on. And it sounded so similar. And then just other people in Ireland, several people in Ireland and several more people in America just kept coming. All these messages or emails or texts or phone calls. And so I remember Sarah actually having several blood tests for Lyme's.
And when we approached the doctors about that, we were all excited, maybe this is the answer. And I'll just share briefly, what Lyme disease is a tick that carries that disease, and often other infections we found out, because Sarah got more than just Lyme disease. But the tick bites the person. Sometimes they will get a bullseye rash. That does happen in a lot of cases, but it doesn't happen in all cases. It did not happen for Sarah. And Lyme disease is a very serious illness. If it's not treated with antibiotics early on, it gets into many different parts of your body and it causes severe illness. People have even died from Lyme disease, particularly if the Lyme bacteria gets into the heart. But we did not realize it was so serious. But it accounted for a lot of Sarah's symptoms. And what we found out as well is the test for Lyme, the common test is called an ELISA test, is notoriously inaccurate. I read one authority that said it's about as good as flipping a coin. 50% of the time it's wrong. And that's due to the test not being a very good test. And also that Lyme is just very difficult to test for at different stages in the illness, you can produce a negative test when you actually have Lyme. Okay. So, and you know all this. So you've got to look at the clinical symptoms. And usually the doctors we encountered, they said, basically, if you don't have a bullseye rash, if you were not aware that you got a tick bite, and if you didn't have some other symptoms, a lot of times they're looking for a fever. If you didn't have those symptoms, there's no way you had Lyme disease. And we came to find out that it's actually a very complicated illness, and you can have
to diagnose
many different symptoms, and different patients have different symptoms, you know. So,
and I remember Sarah had the fever that would often come at the beginning of Lyme's disease.
Yeah,
she had a rash.
Yes,
but you know, as we said earlier, we thought she has very sensitive skin, so a different cream, you know, would flare up her face. You know, sun cream, any kind of sun cream flares up her face. So it was kind of explained away, and by the time we'd even taken her to the doctor, it was fading, and we weren't, you know, aware of watching for a bullseye on her face. So we don't even remember if it was that shape or not. It was just a rash. Yeah.
And I remember then after a short time, we realized, particularly in that last hospital where she was, that the doctors really had concluded that could not be what was wrong with her. She did not have Lyme disease. And we still were not convinced. And I think it was around that time they also began to say, it is something psychiatric. It can't be anything else. We've done so many blood tests by process of elimination. There's something psychiatric here. And you remember the doctor spoke to you? You asked, will there be any more testing for physical things? And how did the doctor
I asked, would they continue to treat her physically? And when she said no, that greatly concerned me. I mean, her face was always sweaty. Her hands were always sweaty. Yeah. Her color was wrong.
She was losing hair.
She was losing hair. Even just her skin wasn't right. And the fact that Sarah felt so unwell, and knowing her as her mother, she had been very happy in school. She'd been very happy at home. There was a lot of good, really, really good things happening in her life. And there was no trigger. There was no like sudden, you know, being off by herself or pulling away from the family, or there was nothing that that would clue us into anything psychological or psychiatric. And I am so careful in these moments to realize there are serious psychological and psychiatric issues and mental health disease that, you know, maybe aren't even triggered by a particular, you know, trauma or anything. Sometimes, you know, if our bodies can break, our minds can break. And, you know, we live in a very broken world. It's just that as a mother, and I'm not medically trained, but just as a mother, it just didn't sit right with what I was looking at physically in her body. You know?
And I think it as well, the instinct of parents, and I think particularly of a mother, is very important in illness. And I think, and both of us, I think we were heartbroken. I remember just feeling so hopeless at that stage because I had thought maybe this would be the answer. And maybe then the doctors will figure it out and they'll be able to give her some medicine and she will get better. And I remember making phone calls to try to find a doctor that could treat her if she had Lyme. I called doctors all over Europe.
Your long list of doctors.
Yeah. And then it really came to a point where the doctors were saying there's going to be months now in hospital of psychiatric treatment. We can't tell you when she will get better. And obviously that is a real, you know, scenario that plays out for some people, and it's real. But we're thinking, it seems to be something physical to us. Again, we don't have medical training, but that was our instinct. And but I remember feeling so hopeless at that point, you know, that we still don't know what it is. We think there's a physical cause. The doctors have said now, no, it can't be. And meanwhile, Sarah is getting so sick at that point, she couldn't even eat.
She hadn't the strength in her jaw to chew. And so you would take maybe 45 minutes to eat 3 or 4 bites. And I remember her just looking at me saying, I'm so hungry.
Yeah.
But she'd have to stop eating because she would get too tired eating.
Yeah.
I remember your mom came in one day and her whole goal, she had been away and she didn't realize Sarah had gotten so sick. When you tell someone over the phone, it just doesn't prepare you for how changed Sarah was. And she came in and she was trying to get her to eat 10 Cheerios. You know, a 9-year-old healthy, you know, she was healthy. She was a great eater. And you're going to eat 10 Cheerios. You know, it was just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so even physically, her body was just not functioning well. Her liver numbers, that with all the blood tests they were doing, weren't good. And so they even stopped giving her pain relief. So then she was in such awful pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
On top of, you know, with not even just a little bit of relief for pain.
Because her joints she's getting these stabbing pains in her joints at this point. They ache a lot of the time. She wakes in the night with the pain.
But she couldn't move to get more comfortable. It was really tough.
I remember too, I feel like we had hit rock bottom at that point.
Much, yeah.
Do you remember going to Eddie Rocket's that Monday night? My sister had come in to sit with Sarah while we did. And there was not much conversation at that table and that night.
Because there's nothing to discuss. It's just, they said she's fine physically. Yeah. And they weren't going to do anything more.
Talk about that night in the hospital. You really had an interaction with God that was remarkable and pretty raw.
Very
from
raw.
What you told me.
And again, anybody that's been through very deep waters medically knows that, like I said earlier, you don't have a lot of time to, have, like nice times to read your Bible or to sit and quietly pray.
You don't have time to bless yourself.
Nothing.
Sorry.
They don't hardly have time to get a shower. It was really tough. And because if Sarah needed anything, if she needed a drink of water, if she needed to move her hand, if she needed to move her head, we had to just stand over her and do everything. And I remember feeling so incredibly emotional. I was wrung out physically from severe lack of sleep. I was so heartbroken at that point. I remember I could hardly eat myself. I would eat a few bites and just feel sick. And then, so I know physically and emotionally it was so much, but spiritually I was just beginning to feel so alone. Yeah. And I've had a strong relationship with God where, since as a child, there's some things that happened and Jesus was always there for me. Yeah. And he was my best friend. And I don't say that like tritely or lightly or like a cliche. It was like, no, he was really, really the best friend that I'd ever had. And I wouldn't just tell him my problems. I told him the happy things too. Like he was like a real friend to me. And so all of a sudden feeling like I was so alone and he wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
It felt very, very dark as well. Dark emotionally and dark spiritually. Like all I felt like I could pray is help. I didn't feel like I could even put like a nice prayer together. I didn't know as well, like as a mother, what am I allowed to pray? You know, I wanted to pray, oh Jesus, make her all the way better. I want her to be running and playing again. But I know not, we live in a broken world and not everyone gets better. And I didn't know if it was selfish to pray. I had prayed many times, but at that point when it got so bad, I didn't know, God, am I allowed to ask you to heal her anymore? And so I just remember thinking, God, I don't even know what to say anymore, but just help. And, but feeling so forsaken by God, like, did he see us? Was he hearing? I remember, you actually came in. Do you remember what you told me about Rose?
Yeah.
That Rose had come and said, and she was little. She's
that
so
broke
little.
my heart. Yeah. She came to me and she said, Daddy, we've been praying for Sarah. So many people have been praying for Sarah in Ireland and around the world. But she's not getting better. He didn't answer, Dad. And a knife went through my heart.
Yeah.
You know, like I've given my life to teaching the Bible and, you know, trying to
helping people relate to God. You know?
And like, you know, my war cry has been, God is real. You know, he answers prayer. And for my little daughter to say, but it's not working. He didn't.
Yeah. And just thinking, it's not even about me anymore. It's not even just about Sarah. There's so many people looking on. I think the uncertainty of not knowing what she had as well was very hard to come to grips with. But I just remember that night you dropped me back off at the hospital. Oh, it could have been 10, 11 o'clock at night. And a normal night at home, the kids have been long in bed, long asleep.
Yeah.
But I knew Sarah wouldn't be settled without one of us there. Even at that, she hadn't been going to sleep till well into the night because of pain. And, you know, you might finally get her settled and then she have to go to the toilet. And, you know, it was bedpans and lifting her and it was so heartbreaking. And then you start all over to try to get her settled back in bed again.
Yeah.
And the pillow just right. And you can imagine laying on a bed for weeks, you know, and even if everything else was fine, it would just be so uncomfortable, you know, on your joints and on your muscles to not be moving. And so she was in so much pain. And I just remember all the, you know, obviously there were little lights on around the hospital, but it was even dark.
Yeah.
They turned off lights. So walking through back through the hospital was dark and the hallway lights were off. And I went into her room and the other child in the room was asleep and the parents had gone to sleep and Sarah was there. And I just remember just this overwhelming, it's so dark.
Yeah.
And it's like, God's not here. It's like, he's not, I feel so forsaken by God. Even though I kept thinking, no, but God said he wouldn't forsake me. But my experience at that moment was like, but he's not here.
Yeah.
And then I have to stand over her bed in the dark and watch her suffer. And I can't fix her. I mean, I can move her and move her and move her and love her and hug her and cry with her, but I can't fix her. And I just had to watch her suffer. And I just went in with this like panic and this overwhelm with all these feelings. And my sister-in-law left and she's just a dear. And but then I was alone in the room with her and I was getting everything settled and kind of standing over her again. And just God just swept into that room and just helped me realize that just that when Jesus was dying on the cross, it was so dark because he was taking all the brokenness and the horrible darkness of this world on his own body. And so it literally got dark in the world for those hours. And he went through that darkness for me. Yeah. And then there's that moment in the Gospels that talks about how God the Father turned his back on the Son because he couldn't look on him because Jesus was literally paying for our sin. Like he took sin on his own body. And Jesus cries out, oh my God, why have you forsaken me? And I just remember thinking that Jesus was actually forsaken by God the Father. So that when I felt forsaken, that he knew I was going through far better than I did because I wasn't actually forsaken. Because his promise is that he's always there. And even at the darkest time, he's always there. And he's promised to never leave us alone. And just what a comfort that was. And my heart was starting to just be more at peace. And I just thought, and God the Father then had to see his son suffer so much for something he didn't even do. And so even then that God would understand my heart as a parent having to see her suffer and not be able to do anything. And just at that point, just my heart was at rest that God knew what he was doing. This was really hard. It didn't take away from the emotion, you know, it was still tragic and it was still hard. I'd be still running outside the door to have a little cry or try not to cry outside. And hope no nurse would come and put her hand on my shoulder because you could hold the tears back.
I was going to say, I remember you telling me that, yeah.
Oh, you know, if no one showed kindness tonight, you could, but if someone went to give you a hug or something, you know, the tears would start. But just my heart was so much at rest. No, God had not forsaken us.
And that is such a powerful thought that you've just shared, because we think of God as just far away and he doesn't know what we as human beings go through. Our lives are tough. We face challenges. We're not.
He's off in heaven and it's all perfect.
Yeah, and it's all perfect. But not so.
No.
Jesus experienced being forsaken for real. God experienced the loss of a son, you know, a child, you know, and wow, that just blows away maybe our misconception about who God is, you know.
And the love that he has for us.
Thank you for listening today, and a special thanks to my wife Heather for sharing her heart in this episode about what it felt like to be Sarah's mom through that difficult time. And I really wanted you to see what Heather went through during that time. Well, do join us next time for part 2 of Sarah's story. It's really the good part. We had a dizzy dancing way that you feel as every fairy tale comes true moment. As Joni Mitchell said, later on in the story, and things turned around very unexpectedly and rapidly, and thankfully Sarah fully recovered, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode. Well, do check out the different formats of the podcast on Facebook and YouTube for the video version, and also Spotify and Apple Podcasts for the audio only version. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Well, thanks again, and until next time, take care.